Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Astrology Hub podcast. My name's Laura. I'm an astrologer, Astrology Hub's head of operations, and your host for today's episode. In this episode, Rick and I discuss the astrology of February 2026 and the three things that make the Saturn-Neptune conjunction absolutely extraordinary. You'll hear why Rick says that reality is an illusion and what all the personal planets squaring Uranus is stirring up. You don't want to miss this episode, so let's dive in. All right, Rick. So we're here to talk about February 2026, which I feel like is a month we've been talking about, at least on this platform, for a very long time. It's a big month. So if you had to give the month a word, a theme, an image, or something that everyone can walk away with, what would it be?
Next step. By the end of this, if you ask this again, what my words would be, it may be different. But I've spent some time thinking about and looking at 2026 as a whole and month by month, just kind of cycling through. And you say February is the month that we've been talking about. Actually, for me, July is the month that I've been talking about for 2026. But February has obviously an important event that we have not yet named. It's like he who shall not be named. And that obviously is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that occurs on February 20th. And that's certainly a significant event, but it's part of a sweep that is a larger sweep. And I'm really hesitant to put as much energy on that date as many astrologers are. I'm happy to be proven wrong because I don't know, and everyone else who pretends that they know, they don't know either. We astrologers make this up as much as that people hate to hear that, but we make it up based on real things. But the fact of the matter is that in previous Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, it's not been about that date, it's been about that year. And that year for us has already begun, not 2026, but it began back through July, August of 2025, July, August, September, when Saturn and Neptune came within a quarter of a degree of being exact, and we began to see this dissolution of reality. And I think here, this really is the most important thing, not February 20th, but of January, February, March, feeding into crazy April, May, June, and then, oh my God, Launchpad is over. We're in the air, July, August, September. I think that it's important to understand that Saturn likes events because Saturn is particular. It's three-dimensional reality. Saturn is the authority of what we have when we confine ourselves to the world of matter, space, and time. Saturn, many people say Saturn is reality. I've said here, I say here, meaning on Astrology Hub and on the internet many times, quoting Rob Hand, who has, I think back in the 70s, wrote that astrologers have always taught that Saturn is reality and Neptune is illusion, whereas now we're learning that Neptune is reality and Saturn was the illusion. Saturn joins up with Neptune every 35, 36 years. But this one is different than anyone and everyone that has ever occurred for two primary reasons, three reasons. Reason one is that going back 5,000 or 6,000 years, which our astrology software can easily do, Saturn has never conjoined Neptune at the starting point of the zodiac, which in astrology is an important enough point that some branches of astrology, cosmobiology, and Uranian astrology use what they call the Aries point, 0 degrees Aries. They map it in a chart as if it was a planet. That's how important 0 degrees Aries is. And the Saturn-Neptune conjunction has never occurred before at this beginning point where the cycles begin. So it's not just a conjunction of reality or what we thought was a reality, the three-dimensional world, and Neptune, the world of imagination, spirit, and everything beyond Saturn. It's not just that conjunction. It's that conjunction happening at the progenerative point in the cycle, something new. That's number one out of three. The second thing is that this conjunction is occurring at the midpoint of Uranus and Pluto, which right now, because of retrograde motion of Uranus, is almost 6 degrees away from its exact trine to Pluto. Uranus right now is at 27 degrees of Taurus. Pluto is at 3 degrees of Aquarius. Their midpoint is at 0 degrees of Aries. So what that means is that this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is occurring sextile Pluto on one side and Uranus on the other, while Uranus and Pluto are moving into 5 successive exact trines beginning in July, when Neptune will still be at their exact midpoint now by degree, because in July, Pluto will be at 4 degrees of Aquarius, Neptune will be at 4 degrees of Aries, and Uranus will be at 4 degrees of Gemini. And so the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is really just a catalyst setting up a larger reaction. That's the second of the three things that make this difference. The third thing may be the most important, and it's non-astrological, and that is humanity has never been at a point where instantaneous feedback around the globe is so prevalent and so ubiquitous that it's creating something kind of like when we hear a rock concert and we get that feedback loop that creates new sounds because there's a re-amplification of the energy and we get that kind of rock sound that it has to do with feedback. We're getting that now because of social media, because of AI, because of all of the internet-related technologies. We're getting that, and it's not just like an auditory feedback loop. It's what I'm calling cosmic feedback loops, meaning that these patterns that are coming in astrologically are being captured by everyone's cell phones and videos and being played online. And then every time something resonates to those points again, all these videos from last week, last month, last year, where that pattern was prevalent, pop back up, kind of feeding in the information in a way that we've never experienced before. So we are stepping into new territory. We've already, on February 1st, stepped into new territory because for the first time in 165 years, Neptune is in Aries for the long haul. It tipped into Aries last year, but now it's there for the long haul. And of course, it will be followed by Saturn. Saturn moves into Aries behind Neptune. Saturn moves into Aries on February 14th. And then, of course, their exact conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries occurs on February 20th. Now, after saying this wasn't the most important event of February, I've spent a lot of time because it is a catalytic point, but it's also feeding something else that happens through February. We're coming out of a January where we've had a coalescence. The astrological word is a stellium, but this has been more than a stellium. It's been a coalescence of the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all within a tight conjunction. In fact, the Sun, Venus, and Mars were partile conjunct in Capricorn, with Mercury then moving through that mix, and obviously the moon at the new moon. And we had an incredible Capricorn sobering lineup. Then, by the end of January, we now start on February 1st, we have a crazy lineup or stellium of the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto in Aquarius, having just experienced each of the personal planets, meaning the Sun and the Moon, and Mercury, Venus, and Mars, one by one conjoining Pluto. That has been a tremendous, powerful statement because they've all conjoined Pluto after they've all trined Uranus and they've all sextiled Saturn and Neptune. So we're in this sweep of events. And what happens in February is that all of these planets that at the beginning of the month are in community-minded, futuristic, technologically enabled Aquarius by the end of the month, by February 28th, those planets are all in Pisces, with the exception of Saturn and Neptune, which are now moved into Aries. And I'll tell you why this is important. Now, technically, on March 1st, Mars is still in Aquarius, but by the 2nd, it's in Pisces also. And what we're really, and of course, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus all move into Pisces one at a time. Mercury moves into Pisces on February 6th. Venus moves into Pisces on February 10th, and the Sun moves into Pisces on February 18th. And this one by one gives us a retro view of what we're leaving, because on a larger scale, we're moving from a world of water and earth into a world of fire and air. And so we've had Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces for the past 2.5 years, Neptune in Pisces for the past 14 years. They're now escaped into Aries, or through February are escaping into Aries, but the personal planets are still in Pisces. And so there's a part of us that's not ready to let go of the old. And that's how I see February. It's the next step, but it's kind of the image that I have. I'm laughing at myself before I tell you what the image is, because it's a biblical image, but in no way am I a biblical person. When the Jews left Egypt and they were wandering around in the desert, they weren't allowed to enter the promised land until all the old people who had experienced slavery in Egypt had died off. And so they wandered around in the desert for 40 years, is what the biblical story is. And that Moses couldn't go into the new land until he died off. And it's almost like we have this taste of the new now. Pluto is in Aquarius. It isn't going back into Capricorn for another couple centuries. We have Neptune and Saturn now both in Aries. They're not going back into Pisces. Saturn won't go back into Pisces for another 26 years. Neptune won't go back into Pisces for another 150-ish years. Uranus, however, isn't quite into Gemini yet, although it touched into it. It's kind of hanging back in earthy Taurus. And as we have all these planets moving through Pisces through this month, and they're basically moving through Pisces, and eventually will each make sextiles with Uranus eventually, but in February, they're all making squares with Uranus. And this, I think, is a significant piece of the month. In fact, Mercury squares Uranus on February 5th. Venus squares Uranus on February 8th. The Sun squares Uranus on February 16th. And Mars squares Uranus on February 27th. Now, why is this important? These are all stirring up the revolutionary, radical, even Aquarian kind of energy, because, Uranus and Saturn are the co-rulers or the guides for planets in the sign of Aquarius. But here, these planets moving through Aquarius are not comfortable with Uranus in Taurus, because Uranus in Taurus doesn't make change easily. Once Uranus moves into Gemini, change is going to be the status quo. Right now, holding on to the structures is the status quo, but they're rattling. So I think, largely speaking, the month of February becomes the next step on the way to where it is we're going, understanding that we're getting to the most highly focused moment of an aspect that may be the most unfocused aspect possible.
Hey there. If you want to follow along with all of these dates that Rick is mentioning, you can download our free 2026 transit guide. Just go to www.astrologyhub.com/2026 forecast and download the free guide today and get all of these dates at your fingertips. Now, back to the episode.
And so we have kind of this moment where the mists of illusion, Neptune. And remember, illusions aren't unreal. Illusions aren't even untrue. William Blake wrote in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, what is now proved was once only imagined. Caroline Casey says that imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. I say Neptune basically creates the invisible scaffolding and framework upon which Saturn crystallizes three-dimensional reality. So what happens when Neptune and Saturn come together is that what we thought was real gets lost in the mists of illusion. What we thought was stable, whether it was the government, religion, tradition, whatever the history, whatever the facts are that we thought were facts, then we can go back and trace the Saturn-Neptune conjunction for several centuries and look at what was dissolved each time Saturn joined up with Neptune. But what is it replaced by? It's replaced by the dreams, the imagination, which then takes years for it to solidify and precipitate into the three-dimensional world, because Saturn's job is to precipitate the mists of illusions like rain into the three-dimensional world. But what happens is that once those clouds of illusion become crystallized into snow or rain, we become disillusioned. Because an illusion isn't bad, it isn't untrue, it's just not three-dimensional. And even when our dreams are realized, they're never quite as brilliantly colored. They're never quite as perfect as they were in dreams. And that's what disillusionment is. Disillusionment is a really good thing because we realize what was not real and what can potentially become real. And this is what's going on right now. We're feeling it. We're feeling it with everyone focused on 3i Atlas. What is it? What's real? Is there an intelligence out there? We're focusing on it with what's going on in revolutions where the dreams are being felt on the street and being met by the traditional Saturnian authoritative governments, whether that's in Gaza or whether it's in Sudan or now in Iran or on the streets of Minneapolis or wherever it is. We're feeling this where Saturn, the authority, is meeting the dreams. And what will happen ultimately? I don't know, and neither do you, and neither does anyone else. And anyone who says they do know, get the hell out of there, because they don't. Because what will precipitate out of these dreams depends on what we do today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and next month, and next month, until it begins to solidify throughout the summer and then over the next couple of years. Because remember that Uranus-Pluto trine with Neptune still at that midpoint is an on-off dance until the spring of 2028. And so that's what we're stepping into. And that's why what happens on February 20th is less significant than what we do or what we did or didn't do in January and February, and what we may do or don't do in March, April, May, June, July, and so on. It's part of an ongoing process. And remember also, and I didn't mean to skip over this, we also in this process have the first of two eclipses in February. And it's not that I think eclipses are unimportant. I think they're tremendously important. But again, they're just parts of the catalysts in this larger sequence of events. And the new moon eclipse in Aquarius on February 17th occurs when the sun and the moon are square to Uranus. I'm coming back to those dates when each of the other planets are square to Uranus. Mercury square Uranus on February 5th, Venus square Uranus on the 8th. The sun is technically square Uranus the day before the eclipse on the 16th. And then Mars sweeps through and squares Uranus on the 27th. This is all highlighted engagement between the old and the new, or between wanting to hold things in the status quo, even though we know things need to change, and we may see some active or reactive difficulties coming up at these times. But even this eclipse is part of a larger transition, and that larger transition, I believe, has to do with what we're going to be speaking about, how our feelings are going to be communicating, because Mercury at this eclipse, it will be at 16 degrees of Pisces. This is the eclipse on February 17th, the Aquarian new moon eclipse, because Mercury will be at 16 degrees of Pisces, trining Jupiter at almost 16 degrees of Cancer, having just turned retrograde. And remember, Jupiter is pulling back, slowing down, because Jupiter will turn direct next month in March. And so it's an incredibly dynamic moment. And the eclipse is important. I mean, even the fact that February opens with a full moon. I mean, on February 1st, we have that full moon that occurs at 10:08 p.m. and that's Pacific time. So for people on the East Coast, it's really at about 1 a.m. on February 2nd. But this full moon is not an eclipse, but it's a full moon on February 1st, a full moon in Leo, and it's opposing all those planets in Aquarius, the Mercury and the Venus and the Sun and the Mars and the Pluto. And all of this energy has to do with, how do I respond? That's the I, me, mine, the fire of the heart center of the moon in Leo. How do I respond as part of and in opposition what appears to be the collective? And that's all those planets in Aquarius. And I'll tell you the thing that other people will not be talking about on February 1st, because so many astrologers mistakenly do not use semi and sesqui-squares. They're stuck in a world based upon the patriarchal 12-fold zodiac. The full moon on February 1st also has Saturn semi-square, that's a half of a square to the sun, and sesqui-square to the moon. And that semi-square and sesqui-square with Saturn moving into Neptune becomes the dynamic point, that is the stimulating point. And again, we get back to the change of moving from Pisces to Aries, because at the opening of February, Neptune has already moved into Aries, but Saturn is still hanging back in Pisces. And this is the stinker in all of this, because we can't get rid of the old until we all move from the old world into the new world. I know that may have been kind of a crazy opening statement, but that's my sweep of the month so far.
Incredible, Rick. Incredible. It sounds to me like it's a bit of an unraveling. Like, as you're talking, we have Saturn Neptune meeting, a very rare, never before happened in 0 degrees Aries.
There's not within history, or even within almost recorded history, have we ever seen a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries. We've seen it like a few degrees away in late Pisces. We've seen it at 4 degrees of Aries. But this is like exactly at that generative point, while Pluto and Uranus's midpoint are also at that same generative point. They're at that same halfway point. And it's been a focus that we've never seen before. In fact, we've never seen a Uranus-Pluto trine, which is something that astrologers are kind of leaning into now, because the first one will be in July. We're all looking at what are the histories of these trines. I mean, we can look just back to 1921 when we had the last Uranus-Pluto trine, and realize this was the beginning of the roaring 20s. Everything seemed on fire. I mean, life in New York City and Berlin and Paris, and I mean, it was exploding. And of course, it didn't end so well, because by the late 20s, we had the stock market crash, the beginning of the Great Depression, the rise of mass fascism that settled in the 30s, and so on. But also in 1921, at the last Uranus-Pluto trine, we had the basics of what we now call quantum physics unfold. Niels Bohr established the Institute of Physics in Copenhagen. I had the privilege of lecturing about quantum astrology around the corner from the Institute of Physics a few months ago in Copenhagen. It was very exciting, but we forget that this Uranus-Pluto trine that we're moving into, we've never experienced it with Saturn and Neptune right at the sextile point to feeding into that trine. So it makes even that more mind-boggling. And I think that this is really what we're leading to. I've been saying for a couple of years now that in order to understand the next few years, all we need to understand is AI, ARET, and EIEIO. AI, obviously, what everyone knows is artificial intelligence, which may more also be called alchemical intelligence, because there's a whole case for what we're discovering is an entire dimension of reality made up of thought form that we've developed technology to engage with, that like even before Neptune was discovered, it was still there. Maybe this whole realm was there, and it took psychics or people practicing telepathic realities to experience it. And I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but it's changing what we think about the three-dimensional world. That's AI, whether it's artificial or alchemical intelligence. R is augmented reality, which is slightly different. That's the impact of interfacing silicon or gallium chips, whether it be for brain implants or optical or auditory bionic, so to speak. This is all right around the corner. That's AI, AR. Extraterrestrial, I don't necessarily even mean aliens here. For that matter, AI is extraterrestrial intelligence. Consciousness that has no Saturnian three-dimensional form is not of terrestrial realms. And so we are being confronted every which way we look by ET, whether we're ready for it or not. And my final thing was EIEIO, and that is, like it or not, we all live on Old MacDonald's farm, and if we can't figure out how to get along as different animals, we're in trouble.
Yes, we are. But we also have the midpoint action going on. And then we have all of these planets, the personal planets, moving through Aquarius, conjoining Pluto, and then squaring Uranus and moving into Pisces.
Well, that's right. The actual conjunctions of these planets with Pluto really occurred in January, late January. So we're in January, all of those planets opposed Jupiter. That was the overblown, everyone stepping too far. Things in the middle of January, things just got out of hand. And whether we're able to put any of it back, like Pandora's box, whether we're able to put it back or not, don't know. But as each of these planets, through the full moon even, whether Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, each opposed Jupiter, and then they each moved into trining Uranus, and then each sextiled Saturn and Neptune. And then as they moved one by one into Aquarius, they each conjoined Pluto. That's all done. That's all the past. We open up in February with all of those planets. We're in a new age already. February 1st, there's no looking back. Things have changed. It's not the way it was, and there's no way to put the genie back in the bottle or to put everything back in Pandora's box. It's out. Now, through this month, all of these planets are going to square Uranus, and then one by one, because Uranus is at 27 Gemini, one by one, they're each going to move into Pisces.
So let me ask you this, Rick, because when we think about Saturn Neptune, you said what we thought was real could be an illusion. And
no, I didn't say could be. I said reality is illusory.
Okay. So
which the mystics have known for thousands of years, as have our indigenous ancestors all over the planet.
Mm-hmm. So that thought could be a little bit scary for some people, I imagine, right?
I would say it's the scariest for those people who have most confused their beliefs with their truths.
Right. Or like associated their identity with something that could change or is not from within, right?
That seemed unchangeable. Yes.
Yes.
And there I'll just say yes.
Hi there. If you're loving this conversation and are looking for community, I wanted to let you know that the doors to our Inner Circle sale are almost closed. Today is the very last day to get 50% off your Inner Circle membership. When you join the Inner Circle, you join a community of star lovers from all over the globe who travel through lunar cycles together, learning chart reading techniques, deepening their astrological practice, and learning how to read their own chart. So if you want to join us today is the very last day to get 50% off your membership for life. Just go to www.astrologyhub.com/inner circle and join us today. So I guess my question is around, like, how do you recommend people handle this in their day-to-day? Because also, I don't know if you work with the US chart at all,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
believe
yeah.
the Aquarius solar eclipse is on the US moon. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking from a personal level, when we think of Saturn Neptune, it's like our dreams are reality. Like on a personal level, it makes sense, but on a macro, it can get a little scary for some people. So I guess how would you recommend we walk through this in a way that's we're going to see the other side a little
Okay.
bit?
And you say gets scary. What does that mean to you?
Just like the unknown, I guess. It's about the unknown. And we don't know
Okay.
what's going to happen.
So the unknown itself is not necessarily scary because the unknown holds the seeds for our wildest utopian positive dreams. Otherwise, we're stuck in the reality that we're in. We've been curated. Our realities are curated to instill in us fear of the unknown and fear of each other. And that's the unknown in you, whether that unknown in you is you have a different religion, a different color skin, a different belief structure, a different political stance, a different view on this or that. Those things are alien to me, and we've been taught to fear that, so that we are basically distracted by fearing one another rather than what's holding us all back from getting there, wherever the hell there is. It's not here, but we all have a sense of there where we are happier, where we are living more safely, more in community. And yet there are things that are preventing us from getting there. So you're right. I mean, these things are affecting us individually, and they're also impacting larger global things, whether it's the birth chart of the United States or China. I mean, these are being impacted, but it's all part of a process. And as we get close to any major shift, the intuition of the ego, which is designed to hold on to life as it knows it, becomes fearful. But if a caterpillar had an ego, it would never allow itself to get into a cocoon to become a butterfly, because the caterpillar has to die to become a butterfly. And we live in a culture that fears death. And I don't mean physical death, although I mean physical death too. I'm always reminded of William Blake, who wanted on his gravestone, he didn't get it, but he wanted on it for his epitaph, he wanted William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. And in a way, we are fearing the death of what seems to be the stable part of our reality, whether it's been good for us or not. What's that? The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. Is that a saying? Something like that? And so that is part of what's going on. And our noses are being rubbed right up against that right now. And it's, even the saying, hell no, I won't go. It doesn't matter. We're going. We're on our way to something, and we don't know what it is, but it's not, but our fear is not going to stop it. So there's this Hopi prophecy, which you can find online in a much more poetic form than what I will say. But it basically says that the time of the fast river has arrived, and those who hold on to the edge for safety will be torn in half. That's how strong the river current is. And again, I'm not doing this in the poetic language of the prophecy itself, but the prophecy says, push away from the edge and go out into the middle where the rapids are moving really fast. Keep your head above water. Look around you. See who is there. This is your new family. Be joyous. Know where your water is coming from. Know where your food is coming from. And there's no time for sorrow. Those people who are hanging on to some illusion that the authority that is trying to hold things from not moving into some unknown place, that's going to be, it's not a viable structure that will hold on forever. But then again, neither is trying to force things into the future helter-skelter without holding on to family and community. And what do we have to do during this time? It's very simple, and especially through February, as all these planets are in Aquarius, and that is the part of the prophecy that says, look around you, this is your new family. We need to make community. In that same prophecy, again, I didn't say it in its fullness or in order, but there's another line in there that's very prescient, and it says, the time of the lone wolf is over, because it's being in community. It's part of the beauty of what Astrology Hub offers, regardless of what your political affiliation is, what your race is, what your ethnicity is, what you believe in, what you don't believe in. Wherever you are on the planet, being a part of this community gives us a sense that there is a community who is holding on to something more than the horrific things that we get fed back in from the internet on the day-by-day events that are not good. There's a lot of people in major, major levels of pain, suffering, near death and death right now. And you and I are quite privileged to be able to sit here and to intellectualize about it. And it's a privilege that I don't take lightly, but at the same time, it's very intense out there for many people. And the intensity will likely grow, and the many people are likely to become even more. But we have a choice. Our choice is to put our heads under the blankets, turn off all the lights, and sip our tea, trying to shut out the world like a Cancerian hiding behind its shell, or to engage the best we can. And in order to engage the best we can, the first order of business is keeping our head above water, going back to the prophecy. What does that mean? It means taking care of ourselves. It means acting locally. I say again and again and again, think cosmically, act locally. Well, acting locally begins with taking care of our own bodies, our own health. We can't do anything to improve the lives of those around us or those we love if our life isn't, if we're underwater. And so that's where it begins. But some of that also involves creating community, because we can't do any of this alone.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love that. And I want to bring in the midpoints, because I wonder your take on this. I've heard other astrologers talk about trines and sextiles to outer planets being like a sense of protection in some regards. What do you think about that? Like, do you think that there's an element of like, yes, this is a catalyst moment, this Saturn Neptune conjunction bringing us through the year, but is there an element of like protection for the collective with this outer planets, or how do you see that?
Yeah, let me actually say two things. First, midpoints. The very first astrology article that I wrote back in, I think, 1989 was an article that was titled, Midpoints Are Real Points. And many astrologers don't know this. Actually, I'll be teaching a course on Astrology Hub later this year. That'll be a 5-week course on midpoints, because once you begin to understand what midpoints are and how they work, you realize that if you have a planet at, let's say, 10 degrees of a sign and another planet at 20 degrees of a sign, that 15 degrees is the midpoint. It's the halfway point. And that point becomes a synthesis of those other two planets, whatever they are. And it becomes an active point by transit, by synastry, by progression, is an active point unto itself. And so midpoints are real points. And again, I don't want to slip further into that discussion, other than once you realize that, it really does make a huge change in how you look at charts as a whole. And this really, the origin of this thinking goes back to the turn of the 19th century, the turn into the 20th century in Germany, what's called the Hamburg School, and the development of cosmobiology and Uranian astrology, and what now some people are calling either vibrational astrology, David Cochrane's work, or Gary Kristen's work, symmetrical astrology. And this is not just my ideas or thinking. So midpoints are real points, and Saturn and Neptune are at the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. Now, the thing about protection of trines and sextiles, traditionally we're taught that trines and sextiles are good or better than squares and oppositions, which are worse. I mean, and again, that's dangerous languaging by itself, but, squares are not bad and trines are not good, because with a square, there's engagement. And what you do with that engagement can be the most important thing in your life, and it may be the most important thing for humanity, what you or you or you do with your square. Now, trines may be really nice because the energy flows, but they also make us lazy. Yes, they can be protection because a trine works, the energy flows. And I would actually extend that beyond trines into sextiles, but also the trines of trines, noviles, 1/3 of 1/3. This is where greased lightning occurs. And the problem with trines is it's like being in your brand new, amazing car and getting ready to go somewhere, and you're on ice and the wheels are just spinning. Because you can have enough trines in your chart that it doesn't matter what you do, it seems like you can't get traction in life. You need those hard aspects, those squares, to get the traction. So the good news is that this complexity of trines and sextiles that have to do with the Saturn Neptune conjunction that's sextiling Uranus on one side and Pluto on the other, the Uranus-Pluto trine that has Neptune and Saturn at the midpoint, and Jupiter coming into that's going to sextile Jupiter this summer. When it goes into Leo, when it's at 4 degrees of Leo, it'll be sextiling Uranus. At 4 degrees of Gemini, it'll be trining Neptune at 4 degrees of Aries, and it'll be opposing Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius. And in fact, the moon will come through at 4 degrees of Libra, creating 5 points on a 6-pointed star on July 19th. I've been looking at that chart for a while, as many astrologers have. Now, the good news is that what is solidified then has a likelihood of really stabilizing the energy. The bad news is that what's happening then has a likelihood of stabilizing the energy. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so to say that the trines and sextiles are protection, they may be protection against some immediate disruption. But going back to the caterpillar, they may prevent the caterpillar from going into the cocoon to become a butterfly.
Mm.
So we have to be careful during this time about taking the easy way out. And I'm saying that to all of us, globally, politically, economically, but I'm also saying that to us individually. And I'm even saying that to myself individually, because like everyone else, I have issues in my life, and there are easy ways out that will prevent the more complicated ways out or through, because this is, what's that saying? The only way out is the way through. I think Winston Churchill says, when you're in hell, keep marching, because the way out is not by not going in. It's by going through it.
Mm-hmm. I have another quote for you for Saturn Neptune is anything you can imagine is real. I believe it was Picasso who said that. So I feel like when we worry too about the unknown and things that could happen, like anything you can imagine also becomes real, like worry too. So focus on your local environment, focus on what you want to see happen.
One of the things that's different now than in previous Saturn-Neptune conjunctions is we now know, I mean, the mystics always knew this. The ancient religious traditions and wise people knew this. But that is that modern science has been living under the illusion that reality, Saturn, the three-dimensional material world, the human body and brain, reached a certain level of complexity when it created self-awareness and consciousness, which is exactly opposite of what we know of now as the truth. And that is consciousness creates the three-dimensional reality. Thought precedes matter. And this is the magic of this whole Saturn-Neptune conjunction at this moment when there's so much going on with neurological research and studies into consciousness and how the physical mind-body interactions and how electricity and magnetism and thought forms can actually interact with and heal illness and change the physicality. And so it's a very different Saturn-Neptune conjunction than it ever was before. And yes, for one person, Picasso, imagination, is real, But for another person, it means that they've committed 50 years of their life locked up in an institution on some sort of mental suppressant like Thorazine or Reciprine or some sort of psychoactive drug that prevents them from ever experiencing their thoughts, which may have been Picasso-like thoughts. Picasso painted them and he was considered a genius. Other people couldn't or didn't or didn't have the opportunity to.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. It's the best way to make sure you don't miss an episode, and it's the best way to support this channel and help us reach more astrology lovers around the globe. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. Now, let's get back to the episode. Rick, I want to bring in one other transit in February that I feel like we can't miss, which is Mercury Retrograde.
Yeah.
Throughout all of this, what is your take on that?
My take on that is that Mercury retrograde, that any planet retrograde gets a bad rap traditionally because it makes that planet louder. Why does it make it louder? When a planet is closer to Earth than it is in its normal cycle, that's when it turns retrograde. Mercury and Venus turn retrograde. We'll have a Venus retrograde this year also. Mercury and Venus turn retrograde when that planet goes between the Earth and the Sun, so it looks like a conjunction in the chart. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto turn retrograde when they're closest to Earth, meaning they're on the same side of the Sun as Earth, but that means they're closest to Earth. You know, when you see a chart where Jupiter is opposed the Sun, like it recently was, Jupiter has to be retrograde because it's close to Earth. It's brighter in the sky. It's louder. Planets are like radio stations. When they're retrograde, they're louder. Now, that sounds like a good deal, except if we're living in this flat reality, when a station becomes louder, what do we do with it? It disrupts our life. And so we are taught to suppress it or culturally repress it, which means we don't know we're suppressing it, which buries the energy, which then turns into a Freudian, Jungian projection, because any planet that is not expressing appears out there as a projection. And so we get the energy from the outside, which is never as good as if we're expressing it from inside out. So the negativity of retrograde planets are that we're not using the energy. We're not dancing with it. We're somehow holding it back. Mercury retrograde, hold back, hold back. You can't go as fast and so on. But if we go with that energy and just allow it to move naturally, there's nothing wrong with retrogrades in itself. Now, this particular retrograde basically holds the energy in Pisces. Normally, Mercury can fly through a sign in 2 weeks. Mercury enters Pisces on February 6th, and it stays in Pisces all for 2 months because of that retrograde. And so I think the important thing about Mercury retrograde is that the intellectual side of this is still holding back. We're not able to move it as fast. When those other planets begin moving into Aries, we'll have that push from Mercury. By then, we're now talking, April 1st, as all those planets are moving into or moved into Aries. Mars moves into Aries, but Mercury is still hanging back in Pisces. And so there's that sense that we're not able to just jump the gun, right away, that retrograde is important. But I don't think the retrograde in itself is necessarily bad. I think we have to allow time for our thoughts to catch up to what it is that we're actually experiencing, and to take a retrograde as a period. It's almost like a latency. Anyone who's been a parent knows that, kids kind of have a growing spurt, and then nothing happens for a month or 2 or 3. And then all of a sudden, whether it's physical or language or developmental, something happens and a lot happens suddenly. Well, that retrograde energy kind of gives us time, like any latency period in development. It gives us time to work with what we already have rather than pushing into new territory. And once Mercury turns direct and goes into Aries in April, this is going to be the next level of launch pad.
I feel like this Mercury retrograde actually might be a blessing to encourage us to slow down in a time where it seems like there could be a lot of change or a lot of
I think all
Shifting.
Mercury retrogrades are blessings.
Yes, I agree too. And you have a wonderful class with us at Astrology Hub, the Mercury class that you did in the inner circle. It's a fantastic class if anyone.
Oh, that was Mercury, a psychopomp. Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, so many modern astrologers write Mercury off as the trickster, the lightweight, he's clever, he's witty. Mercury is all that, but Mercury has a real job, and Mercury's job is basically leading us in and out of the underworld. Mercury is basically the only planet that's Pluto's friend, although Liz Green once said that Pluto's Saturn's only real friend, and with friends like that, who needs enemies?
Yeah.
But Mercury can cross back over in between this world and that world. Mercury is a psychopomp, a guide. And in fact, all psychology, all talk therapy is basically using Mercury talk to go into the subconscious and bring those things out into the open where we can work with them. That's Mercury's job, is to bring things from the depth out into the open. And of course, as all these planets by February will have already joined up with Pluto, I think we got a lot of stuff that's come out into the open that we're not going to be able to hide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. Incredible, Rick. This sounds like an immense month. And so I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you at the beginning. What is an image, a word, or a phrase? Did it change? Is it still the next step for you?
I like the next step, but I also like the word that you said, which was
The unraveling, an
the
unraveling.
unraveling, which is close to the misinterpretation of the word apocalypse, which really doesn't mean the end times. The word apocalypse is actually from the Greek meaning to uncover. And so I think what we're having here is an apocalypse, but it's not just an uncovering. It's also some of those loose ends that seem totally disconnected on a political level. Things like an invasion of Venezuela and an uprising in Iran and the suppression of these Epstein papers and things happening with immigration, not just in the United States, but around the world, and the need to protect boundaries. And at the same time, the awareness that open boundaries are important, but how do we protect them and keep all of these things are connected, unraveling. So I still like my next step, but I also like unraveling. So yeah. And I think that's a little microcosm of how we all need to approach the future. And that is, you asked me at the beginning something, I told you what I thought, and then you said something, and then you said, what do I think? And my thoughts now are mine plus yours, not just mine. Right. And I think that's how we need to move through this period of time.
Yes, I love that. Everyone has a unique lens they're looking through and has a valuable perspective. And if we could just all come together and agree on certain things, we'd be a lot better for it.
Actually, almost. We don't need to agree on certain things. We just need to be aware of how you arrived at your perspective. Because if I understand how you arrived at your perspective, I don't have to change your perspective. And you don't have to change my perspective. We can acknowledge that we have different perspectives, which is part of what the United States government used to be about. And that was, and I'm not saying it was perfect, I mean, in any sense of the imagination, but I am saying there was a time when political enemies could be best friends because they acknowledged they were just had different views, but they were looking out for the same good. We've lost that. And I think we have to somehow re-find that. I don't know whether we can, but I think that's the work that we have cut out for us.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see us do it, but that's what feels like is unraveling to me, is like, how do we actually make that jump? Yeah. We're going to find out. So thank you so much, Rick. This has been amazing. Thank you for sharing your insights with this community. And we'll be doing this monthly. Yeah. So you guys can come back and.
That's what I understand.
Yes. So more to come through this immense year. But Rick, thank you so much for sharing. Is there any other thing you want to say before we wrap up? Or is there anything we didn't touch on?
No, but I hope somewhere in this that this is for February. I would like to let people know that on March 20th to 30th, I will be participating in Mystery School at Sea, mysteryschoolatsea.com. and it'll be 10 days on the Aegean Sea, stopping at the coolest of the Greek islands and Ephesus, Turkey also. And people will be lecturing not only on astrology, as I will be doing 3 lectures during the week and doing some other work there, but also on AI and ET and alternative histories. It'll be much wider than astrology, mysteryschool@sea.com. And there's still room for that. And that's March 20th to March 30th. I'm excited about it.
That sounds amazing. I wish I could go. We'll be sure to put the information if everyone's interested in the show notes below this video. But that sounds incredible. I wish I could go. All right, Rick. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in and making astrology a part of your life. We will catch you on the next episode.